You're listening to Now I've Heard Everything, interviews from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s with voices from the past.
I wanted to see how modern life has changed a body part. And of course, the breast was much more interesting to study than something like the liver.
Journalist and author Florence Williams. Today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. Well, the popular actress Suzanne Somers recently became the latest high-profile victim of breast cancer. But the CDC estimates that 42,000 women will die from the disease this year, and several hundred men will as well. So it's astounding, it's alarming how little we actually know about the human breast. In 2012, author and journalist Florence Williams researched and wrote a book that she called Breasts, A Natural and Unnatural History. And that's when I had the chance to speak with her for a few minutes. So here now from 2012. Florence Williams.
I wrote this book because I was a science journalist, an environmental journalist, and when I was nursing my second child, I saw some research reports that there were toxic chemicals showing up in breast milk. And as the mother of an 8-month-old, I was very curious to know what this meant. And so I decided to tell the story by testing my own breast milk. And so I sent a vial of it. I FedExed it to a lab in Germany. And it came back positive for flame retardants and a jet fuel ingredient and trace amounts of an old pesticide.
Now, fair to say you hadn't purposely ingested any of these things.
No, in fact, I had been doing what I was supposed to be doing according to all the pregnancy books and the breastfeeding books. I was eating organic food. I was not, consuming copious amounts of alcohol. I was, trying to live a healthy sort of Western Rocky Mountain life. And so it was really eye-opening to me to see that despite my best efforts, my body was sort of contaminated, as are really the bodies of all Americans, male and female.
See, this is what I find fascinating, is how you took that little nugget of an idea and spread it out from there, and pretty soon it became an entire book about this hugely misunderstood organ of the body.
Well, what I learned was that breasts are uniquely sensitive, not only to industrial pollutants, but also to the many vagaries of modern life. The breasts are very changeable. They're mutable. They're sensitive. They were designed by evolution to be this way. They're filled with estrogen and progesterone receptors. They're very fatty. And they're, of course, brilliant and masterful at converting substances from our environment into breast milk. And so I became really intrigued by how else modern life has changed breasts.
Now, you at one point in the book, because I'm not going to try to paraphrase you because your writing is so sharp and crisp in most places, so I'm going to do a poor job if I try to quote you precisely. But you said something in there about that unfortunately, in our latter day, breasts have gotten so overwhelmed by the visual, the discussion of the aesthetic aspect, that we overlook the fact that so much scientifically and medically and biologically is going on in there.
It's a really complex and sort of misunderstood organ. We tend to really over-sexualize it in our culture. We're obsessed by breasts. We're obsessed by how they look. All over the internet, there are pictures of breasts everywhere, and they're often detached. Really? But sometimes there are no heads attached to them. It's just breast. We just love to look at breasts. And we're so kind of seduced by them that we really fail to see them in their full complexity. Mm-hmm. And because of that, we really do a disservice to breasts and to women's health, because we need to be looking harder at breasts, what's inside of them, how they're made, why they sometimes get sick.
I guess, and I'm trying to be very careful. I don't want to be silly, but given science, which is dominated by men's obsession with breasts, why doesn't science know more about breasts?
That's a great question. I think part of it is that breasts are so complicated and complex. But, they're...
But so is the brain.
So is the brain. And there are things we don't know about the brain, too.
True.
But, there's not that much money in studying breasts. Let's face it, we know a lot more about dairy cows than we know about the human mammary gland. The dairy industry is huge, We know more about red wine than we know about breast milk. I interviewed one scientist who works for the Robert Mondavi Institute at UC Davis, and he spent a lot of time studying red wine and its sort of wonderful healthful effects for things like cholesterol levels. And he said, enough already with the red wine. It's sort of overblown. If we really want to look at the one food that's designed to be healthful to humans, we need to be studying breast milk.
It is, well, despite the presence of modern-day chemicals, the perfect food, is it not?
It is the perfect food, or I should say it was the perfect food.
Yeah. Before we screwed it up.
Before we screwed it up, before the flame retardants got in it. The breast milk is just amazing. We used to think of it as a food, but really now we know that it's a medicine just as much as it is a food. And it's filled with these incredible immune-boosting, disease-fighting properties. Breast milk on contact can kill E. coli. It does a great job of inhibiting HIV. So the WHO, the World Health Organization, has recently revised its guidelines to recommend that even women who are HIV positive continue breastfeeding. So that's a real testament to the incredible properties of breast milk. In fact, it's so incredible, and people are learning more and more about it, that it's now on the black market. And people can buy human breast milk on the internet. As I write in the book, it's 262 times the price of oil.
Well, but again, for centuries, families have turned to wet nurses to do essentially the same thing, and just no internet sale involved.
That's right. There have always been mothers out there who, for whatever reasons, either couldn't breastfeed or simply didn't want to. For many centuries, the upper classes hired wet nurses to nurse their babies. And this was a little bit of social engineering because that increased the fertility of women of the upper classes. They didn't have to breastfeed. They could get pregnant again sooner. And so, it's sort of interesting the way that breast milk has been sort of used and exploited and manipulated. Of course, during slavery, too, wet nurses were very commonly used. And that may be one of the reasons today why breastfeeding is not very popular in African-American communities.
I think a lot of people, probably more men than women, assume that when you're breastfeeding, it's like a couple of udders, that just fill completely up. But no, the human body knows, the mother's body knows how much baby wants.
Yeah, the way I describe it in my book is that the breasts are sort of like juice bars and smartphones in one. Your breasts are always in this amazing constant conversation with the infant. And so if the infant gets sick, the breast milk responds by having more immune properties in it, more antibodies. And we know that in certain primates, we haven't studied it enough in humans, but we know that in certain primates, the breast milk actually changes depending on whether the infant is male or female. And we know that in humans, the breast milk composition changes depending on the age of the infant. So there's this constant back and forth between the breast and the infant. It was really astounding to me to learn all this.
Or between the breast and the 4-year-old, according to that Time magazine cover,
That's
or
right.
whatever it was. That was, but I guess on a much more serious note, you spent a lot of time in your book talking about breast cancer. And for all the money and the attention that's been poured into it, it seems like we just don't know a whole lot.
We don't know a whole lot. We don't know what causes breast cancer. We have made great strides in treating it. Women with breast cancer now live much longer than they used to. We have also made great strides in being able to discuss breast cancer. As I write in the book, my grandmother had breast cancer in the 1970s, and it was sort of taboo to talk about it. So in that sense, I think we've come a long way. But still, we are often told as women, not to overeat. We are told not to smoke, not to drink too much. All these things may help our breast cancer risk. But what I learned is that they actually help it very little. And that no matter what we do, we are getting breast cancer anyway. And so many women's advocacy and health organizations are demanding that more resources and more dollars be spent looking at prevention, and that includes looking at chemicals. Right now, we do not test chemicals for health and safety, and that's something that a lot of breast cancer advocates feel very strongly that we need to do more of.
Is there something on the horizon a little bit more humane and a little bit more accurate than the mammogram?
Oh, that's a great question. Mammograms have been in the news a lot. I think many of us are so disappointed to know how inaccurate they are. It's 40 pounds of pressure, radiation. This is a 50-year-old technology. It feels almost medieval, and it's sort of amazing we're still using it. So yes, there are some other promising technologies on the horizon. Some of them involve perhaps using blood tests to determine biomarkers of tumors that are specific to breast cancer. These haven't really panned out in recent years, but we're hoping in the next 5 or 10 years we will get more accurate blood tests for things like breast cancer and also other cancers as well.
Now, when I was a youngster back in the dark ages before the turn of the century, most of my classmates who were girls started to develop 12, 13 maybe. Are we seeing 9-year-olds, 8-year-olds, now 8-year-old girls developing breasts?
We're seeing 7-year-old girls developing breasts, 7 and 8 and 9-year-old girls.
Why is this happening?
I have a chapter on early puberty in the book, and it's a great question, and it's something that we should be concerned about because we know that early puberty is a risk factor for breast cancer later on. And in these girls who develop earlier, we also know that they're at higher risk for depression and substance abuse and sexual abuse. You know, their brains just haven't really caught up to their bodies. And so as parents, we are concerned about it. It may be partly attributable to our sort of unique industrial diets. Sometimes people refer to that as overnutrition. Certainly there has been a trend in the last century of earlier puberty, and that's been mostly for good reasons because we do have better health and fewer infections, fewer diseases, better nutrition. But now the rate of change has really increased. Girls are going through puberty younger and younger, even just in the last couple of decades.
And I worry about what it does to the over-sexualization of girls who are already too young for that kind of image.
Well, and the way they're treated by their peers, I think, really changes depending on their breast development because it's such a sort of a visible cue to the rest of the world, what's going on with them. And so we're also wondering if perhaps all these estrogens in our environment may be interacting with these really sensitive estrogen and progesterone receptors in the breast tissue. And so that's why we need to be looking at some of these chemicals and plasticizers and things in plastics that do actually mimic estrogen.
Oh, and that's the thing. You discovered firsthand just how difficult and how challenging it can be to just say, I just won't have anything plastic touching my environment.
Well, it's, of course, really impossible in this day and age to avoid plastic. I did try it for a few days because I tested my own, my body for some of these plastics. For example, BPA, which is known as the baby bottle chemical. And there's another class of chemicals called phthalates, which are often used to soften plastics, or they're additives in personal care products, especially ones that have perfumes in them, shampoos and face creams. And so I stopped using all that stuff. I tried to avoid eating any food that had touched plastic. This was astoundingly difficult. I had to go basically to the farm and pick lettuce, and I thought about having my own dairy cow, but that wasn't really practicable.
There's zoning laws.
I only go so far as a journalist. I wasn't going to actually buy a cow. But I became a vegan for a few days, and then I tested my blood levels again, or my body levels, and my levels of these substances dropped enormously. But not all the way, and especially not for some compounds. So some of the phthalates, my levels barely dipped at all. And it made me realize that we just really have no idea where these exposures are coming from. We don't know where we're getting these plastics from. Are they in my roofing tiles? Are they in my carpets? Are they in my office chair? Are they in my glasses? We just don't know because products are not labeled and manufacturers are not required to tell us what's in them.
I suppose, and again, I'm trying not to be flip about this, I suppose one could excuse males who are only interested in the visuals from wanting to explore further the biology, but why aren't more women pressing hard for answers to some of these questions?
Well, these are really, really complex topics. The whole concept of endocrine disrupting chemicals, even a lot of journalists shy away from that one. It's kind of daunting stuff. The science is very young. And I think it's difficult for us to make this imaginary leap that substances in our world actually get into our breast tissue. But women should be concerned about it, and actually men should be concerned about it too, because men's bodies are affected by hormone-altering substances, just as women's are. And in fact, the idea of man boobs, sometimes called moobs, is of course a well-known phenomenon. It's also, partly
men get
due
breast
to diet.
cancer.
Men get breast cancer. I have a chapter in that in my book too. It's sort of not very well understood or appreciated. But actually, the fatality rate is higher in men because they're often diagnosed at later stages. They don't think that they have a lump.
Men don't think to be looking for them.
Exactly. And I became very interested in looking at the concept of a body part through the lens of environmental history. I wanted to see how modern life has changed a body part. And of course, the breast was much more interesting to study than something like the liver.
Now, you can get a copy of Breasts, A Natural and Unnatural History by Florence Williams by tapping on the link in our show notes or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com, by the way, is where you'll also hear my interviews with two other well-known women who succumbed to breast cancer. My 1991 conversation with actress Lynn Redgrave.
I am now intensely proud of Georgie Girl and intensely grateful that I got that sort of shot-in-the-arm chance. But at the time, the reviews came out. They were wonderful reviews. People wrote glowingly. But I was called in the press one day, the ugly duckling of the Redgrave family.
And my 1985 talk with author Jackie Collins.
I am often asked when I'm being interviewed, do you want to write a, better kind of book? They kind of lower their voice when they ask me that. I don't. I write exactly what I want to write.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, every Wednesday, and every Friday. And you can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, she was a secretary working a normal, everyday 9-to-5 life living outside Washington, D.C. until a phone call one day in 2008 told her she was now the king of her community back in Ghana. My 2012 interview with Peggy Leen Bartels, also known as King Peggy.
This is the first time that they have a woman king in the town. And for me to sit down with all those elders, and they said, you are a woman, shut up for us to rule you.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.